Are you relocating to Charleston, South Carolina with the hopes of buying a second home here? Maybe you have kids at the College of Charleston or MUSC and you fell in love with the place and now you want something here too. Well, first of all, you're going to love Charleston. There is just so much to offer here. Buying a home here, however, is different from a lot of the other places in the country. In the coming minutes, I'm going to reveal the top 5 things that buyers can overlook when buying a second home in Charleston, South Carolina. My name is Jason Cartin, and I'm with Carolina One Real Estate here in Charleston, South Carolina, and this is where I grew up, having spent my childhood on Sullivan's Island and in Mount Pleasant during the 70s and 80s. I can offer tons of insight like only a true local can. I work with buyers, but more specifically, empty nest clients who are looking to buy a second home here in Charleston. So if that's you, you've come to the right place. Also, if you'll stick around to the end of this video, I'll share the most important document you need to see before even thinking about making an offer. The first topic I'll start with is probably one of the more important topics and one that is evolving every year here in Charleston, and that is flooding. Charleston obviously is a coastal town with rivers and marshes everywhere. This heavily impacts the home buying process here, but the good news is I can help prevent you from buying something you should not. There are 2 types of flooding we deal with here: tidal flooding and storm flooding or storm surge. Tidal flooding can happen really just with a full moon and if the tide's high. It happens a lot more nowadays, and that unfortunately is how things are now. Then on the other side is our storm flooding or storm surge, which is directly related to tropical storm events. This is the ocean water that gets pushed ashore by the storm and can be really where some of the worst flooding happens. As a buyer, the responsibility falls on your due diligence to identify the flood zone and inspecting the elevation certificate if available. The FEMA flood zone is what you really want to know. AE is an example of a high-risk zone. X is a lower-risk zone. And you can't assume anything when it comes to this portion of the process, so please do your due diligence. All right, next up, we have a topic that can be an eye-opening moment if buyers don't know ahead of time, and that is property taxes here in South Carolina. Property taxes are assessed in 2 ways here in South Carolina. You have the 4% assessment on the home if it's classified as your primary residence or the home you'll spend the majority of the year in. And then you have a 6% assessment rate for everything else, which includes rentals and secondary homes. There's another part to this, however. When you close on the property, the county automatically assigns the 6% rate as it doesn't know what your plans are yet for the property. And if you don't submit the proper documentation, you're going to pay a whole lot more than you should, technically, if this is going to be your primary residence. And to get it cleared up is just a hassle that you just don't need. So for those buying a second home here, you'll need to think about how this property and any other properties that you have in your portfolio will affect each other. I've seen buyers actually switch primary residence in some cases where the numbers just made sense, but please check with your own tax professional before you do that. Now, I've also had clients do this. If you have kids coming to the College of Charleston or MUSC and they will be living in the home, they can be listed on the deed as well. And as long as the other criteria are met, you can take advantage of the 4% assessment. But at the end of the day, if it truly is a second home or an investment property, then you just need to go ahead and get used to the 6% tax rate. All right, next up. Nowadays, it seems like we talk about this a lot also, and that is hurricane season. I've lived here most of my life and can remember living with hurricanes since I was in kindergarten, really. And it's just something that we deal with here. You don't want to take it lightly by any stretch if you've never experienced one, especially, but you shouldn't let it overwhelm you. You know, we watch the tropics on our local weather broadcast here to stay aware, but it's nothing that you really worry about day to day. Now, technically, the hurricane season is from the beginning of June to the end of November, but there'll always be storms, it seems, that come even after that. But that is the official hurricane season. Something to consider is it doesn't take necessarily a big Category 5 storm to impact the city. It can be a small Category 2 storm, or in some cases, just a tropical storm. Once you've bought the property, you'll want to find out what your evacuation zone is, and there will be times when an evacuation is ordered when a hurricane is approaching. Not to freak you out or anything, but it may happen, and you'll just need to know what your zone is and have a plan in place. One last thing on storm surge, people think of wind as the big deal with hurricanes, but it's technically the storm surge and that really does most of the damage. Again, this is the water that gets pushed ashore from the oncoming storm, and depending on where the storm comes ashore depends on how much storm surge we actually get. Now, and you add in rain, and then you add in a high tide, and this is where some of the catastrophic damage can really occur. Now, remember also that your homeowner's insurance does not cover the items flooded in the interior of the home, so make sure you have the proper flood insurance. I know some clients that have where their home doesn't require it, and they even carry a policy just to be sure, but that would be up to you. I've created a hurricane preparedness guide that is loaded with information that you definitely want to know. Plenty of tips to get you prepared, and you can get that in the link below. In this next part, we will cover the traffic conversation. Charleston's no different than a lot of other cities around the country. Now, we're not Atlanta or we're not Los Angeles, but definitely we have some trouble in some spots. And it's probably not going to get any better anytime soon. So you'll need to just start to get to know the area like the locals do. And here, congestion is predictable with, the time-specific hotspots really. And as you get more and more comfortable with your surroundings, you'll get to know how those work. But from my experience, for people owning second homes here in Charleston, you're typically on a different schedule anyway, so those patterns shouldn't really affect you as much as, say, the day-to-day travelers, and those looking to move here full-time will really need to think about your route or your route to work, because that can definitely have an effect on just your quality of life, just like with anywhere, being stuck in traffic. Now, also, something to also think about when it comes to traffic here, school buses can add to the fun in the afternoons, from 3 o'clock on all over town. If you get behind school buses, you'll know it. Let's just say that. So think about that in the future. And, not to sound redundant, but, Charleston is a coastal area. And, we have the bridges that, get across these waterways. And when there are accidents on these bridges, it creates bottlenecks. We just had one not too long ago where there was just an accident on the Ravenel Bridge and it shut the bridge down. And it creates a ton of traffic. And, that won't change technically with the way that the bridges are and the water here. But, we live in paradise, right? So talk to me when it's 70 degrees in February like it is today. And, so it's a trade-off here with the traffic and living in paradise. I get the question a lot about what's the cost of living like here in Charleston. And while it is true, that real estate values are higher here than a lot of places, there are some good things that buyers may not be aware of when it comes to overall cost of living. And first of all, and this is great news for the retirees or the empty nesters out there, and that is there's no state tax on Social Security here. And so that can free up some extra income to be used elsewhere, anywhere really. Conversely, insurance costs here can be surprisingly higher maybe. Insurance costs are up everywhere though, so just, you take it in stride. I also mentioned property taxes earlier, and compared to the Northeast and the West Coast, our property taxes are relatively low. In some areas of the country, our taxes are still less even at the higher tax rate though. So next is there is no inheritance tax or estate tax here, which helps considerably with long-term wealth plannings. And that is a good thing here for the retirees and empty nesters as well. So now I promise to tell you the single most important document you must have in hand before you even thinking about making an offer on any home here in Charleston. It's not the appraisal, it's not the inspection report. Those are important, but this one can save you from a nasty surprise, and that is the current homeowner's declaration pages for the property, specifically the homeowner's flood and wind and hail insurance policies that the seller has. In other words, get proof of what the insurance is costing the current owner now. Why is this so critical? Because when you're budgeting or getting a quote, you might be told, hey, roughly it's $1,500 a year for home insurance, maybe $800 a year for flood. But if the current owner actually pays, say, $12,000 a year combined for home, flood, wind, and hail, that's a big difference. And if it's on a historic house by the water, you need to know that before you go buy your own policy. Seeing the actual declaration pages from the seller's policy is the most accurate reality check of the home's risk profile and insurance cost. Those pages will show you the coverage and premiums paid. If you see a big number, you can bet you'll be paying something similar as a new owner. This can make or break a deal in some situations, so demand those pages during your due diligence. If a seller or their agent can't provide them, then that's a red flag, but most will. And it's a common request here for sure. So now in the description below, you'll find my Charleston relocation guide, as well as their hurricane preparedness guide that I talked about earlier. They're both just chock full of information for the move. You can also schedule a call with me directly below, or simply comment, leave any sort of comment you'd like, maybe something else you'd like to see as far as one of the next videos coming. And look out for those videos as well about just everything relocating to Charleston. Again, I'm Jason, Carolina One Real Estate. Have a great day.